Senator Russ Feingold, now joining us on the Young Turks. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it as always, Senator.
Great to be on the show. Thank you.
All right, now you are in a bit of a tough election contest now in Wisconsin, which I'm a little surprised by, against Ron Johnson, it appears. First, I think this is enormously important because you're obviously among the strongest progressives in the Senate. I'm sure that he's going to attack you on that. What's the strategy for fighting back on that?
Well, I've never had safe race. I've always had tough races because I'm an independent and I take strong stands and I take progressive stands. So people forget that, but this has been my history, and I refuse to play it safe because I think my job is to represent the people of Wisconsin and fight for working families. And so, the challenge is real, but it's a very doable thing to remind people that, I voted against the trade agreements that set the jobs overseas. I voted against all the Wall Street scams and bailouts. I voted against the reckless deficit spending of the Bush years. And so all the things that people know contributed to the mess we're in are the things that I opposed. Why would you put somebody into office who would have voted for all that stuff? So, I think that's a battle that we not only can win but are beginning to win, but it is a very, obviously, a challenging year to be running.
So that's a second issue, which I want to get to in a second. But, Senator, in Washington, conventional wisdom is if you're a progressive, you better hide it, right? And you better run from it.
I'm from the progressive state. I'm from the great state of Fighting Bob La Follette, where the progressive movement really began and where its strongest evidence exists over the years. So that is part of a proud Wisconsin tradition. I'm a direct descendant of a progressive party member. My father, in those days, there wasn't even a Democratic Party. It was just the Progressive Party and the Republican Party. And so we wear our progressive identity with pride in Wisconsin, and I am proud not only to be a Democrat, but to be specifically from the progressive tradition in Wisconsin. It's one of the things I'm most proud of.
So do you think that if you win, especially in a tough year like this that you were just alluding to, where Democrats are having trouble all across the country, and you run on a strong progressive message, as you just said, does that send a message to the rest of Washington, hey, maybe it's not such a bad idea to run on progressive ideas?
You better believe it. And all you got to do is look back at 2004. In 2004, we had a disastrous election night. Kerry and Edwards lost. We went down to 45 Democratic senators. That night, when I was attacked for my vote against the Iraq War and when I was attacked for voting against the Patriot Act, I won the state by 300,000 votes, while Kerry won it by only 10,000. I carried 27 counties that George Bush carried. It was the fact that I was independent, progressive, and identified with the working families of Wisconsin. So being progressive is much better than being wishy-washy in many places in this country, and we underestimate the power of showing some principle and willingness to take tough stands.
Right, and I think the first part of that is just as important as the second part. Being strong as a politician, it has enormous intangible value, no matter which direction you're going. And in a state like Wisconsin, obviously you say with a proud progressive tradition, you combine the two things, strong progressive, then I think that's a good way to go. Now, I want to talk about a specific issue that's in the news today because it directly relates to all the elections that's coming up. We have the issue of the tax cuts, and should we extend Bush's tax cuts for the middle class? Should we extend them for the rich? And specifically, the issue is, should you split the bill so that you vote on both sides of that, or should you keep the bill together and force the Republicans to take a vote on, the middle class tax cuts and whether they're for it or against it? Where do you stand on that, Senator?
Well, I'm for having both the substantive result that we should have and also making sure people have to go on record. So my view is we should not be continuing the tax cuts for upper-income people. We can't afford it. We couldn't afford it then. We can't afford it now. Those tax cuts clearly have not provided the job growth that they claim it will do, so why would people argue that it should continue? The middle-class tax cuts are something far more legitimate that working families in this country deserve and need at this point. So I think we should put all these things up for a vote, and I will stand firm for a policy of opposing the tax cuts for the very wealthy.
So, politically speaking, do you think that it would be a bad move by the president if he split the bill and let the Republicans vote in favor of the middle-class tax cut and then get to say, hey, Democrats are raising your taxes by voting against the rich tax cuts?
I'm for putting them in a situation where they can't have it all ways and get away with this, so I'd like to see them to have to vote on all of it.
All right. Well, that makes sense for me, too, from my perspective. So we're talking to Senator Russ Feingold. He's, of course, running for re-election in 2010 in Wisconsin. So now let's talk about your opponent a little bit. Ron Johnson says that he's not for any government subsidies except the ones he receives.
That's right.
Are you planning to take advantage of that seeming hypocrisy?
Sure. I mean, it's so ridiculous that somebody gets out there and says, he literally says, you can see in my current ad that you can see on russfeingold.org or on the internet. He says that he would never ask for government help or government assistance, but that's exactly what his company has gotten. They got a federal government paid for the railroad spur that connects their company to the railroad, and he simply refuses to acknowledge that or to thank the taxpayers of the country. He also benefited from some $4 million in revenue bonds that were part of a state government program that, certainly subsidizes through lower interest rates what he has. So here's a guy condemning people like companies in his own town that are getting help from the stimulus bill to create jobs when he's done it himself. So his whole biography is a phony biography based on the myth that somehow he built the business all by himself from the ground up. None of that is true.
Right. Ann Richards used to say about George Bush, he was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. Looking at the bio, Ron Johnson, it looks like he married onto third base and thought he hit a triple.
I will not address that specifically, but the notion that he built this business from the ground up is a completely phony story.
Are you guys going to debate in Wisconsin?
Well, that's very interesting. That's the topic of the day. I said last week I agreed to 6 debates that have been offered across the state. And he hemmed and hawed, even though he knew darn well he was going to win the primary. And today we find out that even though he said he was going to get off the sidelines by running for the Senate, that he's still hiding. He refused to agree to the debate on Sunday night in Eau Claire that I was ready to do. And now he's saying he'll only do 3 debates. And this is really kind of sad because, I think a person that people don't know at all, people didn't even know who he was a few months ago, has a particular responsibility to come before the people of the state. This guy was a stealth nominee at the Republican convention. Nobody knew him. Now he's trying to become a stealth senator. But I'm not going to let him get away with that. People are catching on to this guy. It's all being done with mirrors. He refuses to, even today at Concordia College in Milwaukee area, the reporter was there to cover him. He wouldn't answer questions. He would just give the fluff and not do the follow-up. And you know what? People of the state deserve more from a senator than that.
Senator Feingold, that's really strange because, the contest is close, so, you have to be enormously vigilant. But the last poll I saw, you were up by about 2 points. So if he's trailing, why would he not want to do debates? I mean, is the idea, hey, if people don't find out what I stand for, I'll have a better chance?
They think that just using name-calling, calling somebody a career politician is a sufficient thing this year. So what they want to do is hide the candidate, not let people know that he's really an establishment Republican, a country club Republican, who's essentially masquerading as a Tea Party guy. So they want the Tea Party support, they want the Republican support, they want people who are upset about the economy, when of course this guy is a huge advocate of shipping our jobs overseas through trade agreements that I've opposed and that he's for. So they're trying to do it through a stealth campaign. This is a national strategy, trying to hide the candidate. But, people in my state are way too smart for this sort of game, and they're seeing through it, and they're getting pretty desperate because now they're running ads about things that they say I'm going to say about him. That's their latest thing today. They've apparently figured out what I'm going to say in advance, but, they're just sort of flailing around, and he's hiding, and now the truth is out. He isn't even willing to debate me like my other opponents have done in the past.
Senator, if you do have debates, will you ask him over and over again to thank the taxpayers for the subsidies he's received?
I think we should at least get a thank you note.
Okay, fair enough. And then there's an issue about global warming. He apparently thinks that if you believe in man-caused global warming, that you're a lunatic.
He said that people like me who believe that man has a role in global warming and climate change are crazy. He said that he has figured out that the reason for climate change is sunspots, he says. And the worst thing, though, is apart from his pop science approach that goes against the great weight of scientific evidence, he says it would be, quote, a fool's errand, unquote, to do anything about the climate change issue. I mean, can you imagine just having a senator from the state of Wisconsin in what is Gaylord Nelson's seat, the father of Earth Day, that you would put somebody there who completely scoffs at our role in being responsible about climate change. That alone disqualifies him for the U.S. Senate.
So, Senator Feingold, I'm curious as to what strategy you are going to go with here in regards to Ron Johnson. Is that an issue that that you're going to focus on? Is his subsidies from the state, et cetera? Is that
No,
the
no.
issue? Which way are you going to go with this?
I'm not focusing on Ron Johnson. When you ask me a question about, what's going on here, this isn't Ron Johnson. This is a national political movement that's trying to do this with mirrors by calling people names and not facing any issues and basically supporting the policies that led us into this mess. It's a giant fraud. And what I'm going to do is talk to people about the fact that I oppose those policies, that I have a good relationship with the people of the state, that I go to every one of Wisconsin's 72 counties every year and hold a town meeting, that I'm enormously independent in my voting record, probably the most independent member of the Senate, but I also am bipartisan. I've been on more bipartisan initiatives than almost any member of the Senate. And so it's going to be about me and whether or not people want me to keep working for him. But when Johnson comes off the sidelines and actually shows his face once in a while, we'll certainly deal with that. But basically, he's hiding.